On.
I'm ready when you are.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation's monthly Vet Chat. The New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation is committed to sharing the experiences of the Vietnam War era and its enduring legacy with future generations. The foundation oversees the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the Vietnam Era Museum. The memorial honors all those from the state who served during the Vietnam War, especially the 1,562 New Jersey men and one woman who never returned home. Their names are listed individually by date of casualty on the memorial. The museum is not singularly focused on the state of New Jersey. It teaches the entirety of the Vietnam War era through inclusive and objective exhibitions. The memorial and museum are both conveniently located off of exit 116 on the Garden State Parkway. You can see more on our website, njvvmf.org. The series you are tuning in for this evening, Vet Chat, is a live web series that gives you a front row seat to an intimate exchange with a Vietnam veteran. My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am the Specialist Professor of Public History at Monmouth University in West Long Branch and a trustee of the foundation. I am so honored to be here helping to bring our veteran stories to light in this very informal and accessible way, because I know from experience with my students in particular that there are so many people who simply do not know any Vietnam veterans. And every veteran has a unique story to tell. So here at Vet Chat, we tell those stories, and I think this is the really special piece. You also get to ask questions if you choose. This is a program that started as a way to reach folks during the COVID-19 pandemic when our museum and memorial first closed, but it's lived on, allowing us to reach folks far beyond our grounds. So just some quick housekeeping notes about this evening's Vet Chat before we get started. Today's program is being recorded and will eventually be freely shared on our website, YouTube, and social media. Our website, again, is njvvmf.org. I ask you all to please remain muted while I ask some initial questions of our guest. After about 45 minutes, I'll open the floor to Q&A. At that point, you will be able to unmute yourself and ask your question or type it in the chat. I ask you in advance to please be patient if we have any technical issues. These things often go off without a hitch, but we are using the internet here. So if there's any little glitches along the way, I thank you in advance for your patience. So let's get started. Joining us today is Vietnam veteran John Nugent. John was commissioned as second lieutenant in the U.S. Army upon graduation from ROTC at Georgetown University. After earning his MBA at the University of Chicago, he served 2 years on active duty from 1966 to 1968. He was assigned to the 199th Light Infantry Brigade when it was formed at Fort Benning and served as an infantry platoon leader in Vietnam. And you're going to hear much more about his service and his life post-war once we get started. So are you all ready, John?
I'm ready.
Thank you. So I want to ask you a little bit about your early life first. I do this for everybody. I think that it provides some background and helps to contextualize your experience. So tell us where and when you were born and raised.
Okay, I was born in Buffalo, New York. My dad was in World War II, assigned to Camp Drum in New York. And my mom was by herself as my dad was off at maneuvers at the time. We then moved to Tenafly, New Jersey when I was 4 years old, but initially that's where I was born. So I'll stick to your question.
You said you were going to try to be really good and stick to the question.
I promise.
Tell us a little bit about your childhood. What was your childhood like?
I had a mom, a dad, and two siblings. One, my sister, 5 years younger, and my brother, 11 years younger, which is really difficult when you're growing up. We have been really good friends the last 3 or 4 decades, but it took until I was really in my 30s to really appreciate both my sister and my brother because of the age difference. We become really good friends in addition to just being siblings. My mom taught before she became a mom. She taught Latin and French at the college level. Very, very bright lady, filled with love, enough love for 15 families, actually. My dad stayed on in the reserves after World War II. He eventually became a brigadier general with the 78th Infantry Division up in Edison at the time. It was located in Edison, New Jersey. He was a disciplinarian. He was the general of the family. He taught me my work ethic. While he was in college, he took ROTC in college at Syracuse University. And while he was there, the Depression hit. His father lost the job. He had 2 siblings. He had to come home and help with the family. He had to earn some money. So I can't tell you how many times I learned if I can get up at 4 o'clock, if I could get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to deliver coal and ice, you can get out of bed at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning to do your household chores and mow the lawn. But he taught me an amazing work ethic, and for that I'm really, really thankful. In the last 9-10 years of his life, we had moved within 10-minute drive of him, and he became a real granddad, and he enjoyed my kids really immensely, for which I was really appreciative. But he was a stern disciplinarian. He made us toe the line. Teachers were right. The parents backed the teachers in those days, shock and awe, okay? But it was a great upbringing in Tenafly, New Jersey. It was a blue-collar town. I do remember getting repainted bicycles at times, but I didn't know any better. I had everything I needed. I had the love, I had the incentive, I had the work ethic inculcated by my dad. So it was a great upbringing.
Now, while we're talking about your dad, he served in World War II, but I read that the two of you never really talked about his service. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, there wasn't a great communication between us. I don't know whether it was my personality or his wanting to instill discipline and not be a friend per se, but to be a real strict parent. He was very strict. The only times we talked about his World War II incidents, interestingly, was when I was on business trips. I did a lot of travel to Western Europe, and I told him one time I was in Luxembourg, and I was at this point of 5 roads coming together, and there was this memorial about a battle, yada yada, and he said, "I was there." And then another time I was at the Brandenburg Gate right after the wall came down, and he said, "I was there." In fact, my daughter made it there, and she called me to say, "I'm here where you and your dad were." So I mean, it became a rallying point. So it never came up. We never discussed it, and I never talked about Vietnam. So there was never. In fact, the only real mention about Vietnam that I can remember was when I landed in Newark after flying into San Francisco. I was at the luggage rack picking up my luggage, and my dad came up to me. He picked me up and he said, "Are you okay?" I could have said no. My mom was right there. I don't know what he was going to do. But that was it. That was the sum total. We just never talked about it. Because I never talked about it, and I never encouraged him to do so.
That's so interesting. Back to your upbringing a bit. You went to Catholic school. Now, we've talked about this, and some might chuckle at this, but I have had many veterans tell me that Catholic school, at least back then, was good prep for the military. What would you say to that?
Amen. I can show you the scars on my hand from the rulers that the Sisters of Charity, we had 46 in our class, and there was one nun that ran 46 people. No discipline problems, okay? Corporal punishment was meted out regularly. The parents backed the teachers. I mean, it was amazing. I had 8 years of nuns, and then I had 8 years of Jesuits in high school and college. So by the time I turned 21, I was really kind of messed up, ready for Vietnam, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, the nuns were really amazing. Matter of fact, it just hit me. My first love was a 6th grade teacher, Sister Cecilia, who had the bluest eyes. And one day, and the Sisters of Charity had this ribbed, starched headpiece. And none of the guys could figure out how she could eat corn on the cob because she couldn't move it right and left. But anyway, one day this blonde lock slipped out, and every single guy in 6th grade just almost passed out. Okay, but the nuns were really good. They were very effective, at least in my education.
So you referenced college. You're going to wind up going off to Georgetown. How did you settle on Georgetown?
Well, actually, it was simple. I got a scholarship. Okay, I had Jesuits in high school, which was one of the greatest learning curves I've ever gone through, and was outside of Vietnam the most influential part of my life. The high school is Regis High School in New York City. It's a Jesuit-run school, competitive exam to get in, and I really liked the Jesuits. Frankly, at that time, I thought I had a vocation, and I wanted to continue with the Jesuits. And Georgetown gave me a scholarship, and that was why I ended up going to Georgetown.
Okay. Now, when you were at Georgetown, you were in the ROTC, the Hoya Battalion, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about the training and the ROTC culture at the time.
The training was really good, as you know, because you're a teacher. We had exceptional teachers. We had exceptional officers, a full colonel, a major, a captain, a sergeant major, and several staff sergeants. So we had a great cadre, and they really infused in us not just the discipline of how you take apart an M1 in those days, but the love of country, the patriotism, the mission of the country. So it was more than just marching and taking apart rifles and learning tactics and maneuvers. We had several hundred. There were hundreds, so let's put it that way. We had a brigade broken into 2 battalions. So there were at least 600 people, guys at the time, obviously. In ROTC, the military ball was one of the great social activities at the time. I graduated in '63, so it was before all the anti-war fervor came up. It was Georgetown discontinued ROTC, much to my chagrin and much to I won't get political, but just that we were upset that they discontinued ROTC when the war heated up. But back in the early '60s, we weren't feted necessarily, but we were more than accepted. And it was a great discipline, and it was a great cadre that we had teaching us.
So you're commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the Army upon graduation from ROTC at Georgetown, but then you go on for your MBA at the University of Chicago, correct?
Correct.
Tell us a bit about how that worked.
Okay, I it's very interesting. I was commissioned as second lieutenant. I picked the infantry, showing the level of my IQ, okay? But I did that in 1962. In your junior year, you filled out your dream sheet and filled out, and if you put down infantry as the first one, you were going to go infantry, okay? That was not a non-issue. But Vietnam wasn't even on the back pages of the newspapers in 1962. And I wanted to go, everyone who had been in the infantry or ROTC from infantry went to Europe. And I wanted to get to Europe because I'd only been in the New York, Washington, DC corridor. That'd been the extent of my entire life. But then again, I got a scholarship to the University of Chicago, which had to be taken that year. I couldn't have deferred the scholarship in order to go into the military. So I requested a deferment, was given the deferment, and went to the University of Chicago to get an MBA. Then I also, I seriously at that point was, the military was a viable career option for me. I am very patriotic. I really believe in the mission of the military to defend our country. I had a great example of my dad becoming a brigadier general and fighting for the country in World War II. So I asked for a deferment because I'd never had a white collar job, and I wanted to at least have half a year working before I came on active duty. And so I got a deferment. I had worked every summer and Thanksgiving vacations at the post office in New Jersey, both at night in Newark, New Jersey, as well as delivering mail during the summer. But I'd never had a white collar job, so I wanted to see what it's like before I got in. So I graduated in June 65, and then I didn't come on active duty to February of 66 because I did get the deferment. Procter Gamble took me on knowing I had the 2-year military obligation. And so that's how I ended up going on to the University of Chicago, and why I was deferred from active duty.
Once you have that experience with Procter & Gamble, is there a part of you that says, oh God, is there any way I can get out of this? I don't want to go on active duty now.
I guess the answer is I probably thought of that. I got to tell you, I was kind of naive. I believed in the domino theory. I believed in what we were doing. This was 65. You may ask me the question, in 10 or 15 minutes after I was over there, what did I think? And I'll give you a different answer. But I wanted to do the right thing. I was going to, defend my country. I didn't want more communist countries. And I was probably naive at the time. I did love Procter & Gamble and brand management. I'll fast forward. They wanted me to stay on when I was getting ready to get out. I'll just give me 20 seconds here. And I said I wanted to go back to Procter & Gamble because I would have responsibility for a brand, and I would, Duncan Hines was my brand. I'd be a brand manager and I'd run it, yada, yada. And I'll never forget, this colonel said to me, he was trying to get me to re-up back, this was in 68. He said, well, you'll never have more responsibility than you have in the military. And I said, what's that? He said, responsibility for men in war. And I said, I've been there, I've done that, and I don't want it. But anyway, Procter & Gamble was really good, and we can talk about that later when we get to it in the chronology.
Okay. So you finish your MBA and you're going to go on active duty. You wind up serving active duty from 1966 to 1968. Tell us a little bit about the transition. You're going to go to Fort Benning for the infantry officers basic course, right? Tell us about this transition period in Fort Benning.
Okay, Fort Benning, which is now Fort Moore, I guess it's becoming as it transitions from Benning to Moore, was 8 weeks of hell week. It's the best way to put it. Okay. we knew the war was going on. I had orders for Germany, however. I was going to Germany right from my 8-week basic training course. And what it was bringing you up to date on the latest tactics, the latest weaponry, the latest escape and evasion techniques, if you're captured, what you're supposed to do, et cetera, et cetera. And non-commissioned officers ran it. And this is where any non-commissioned officer who was offended by any officer got back at second lieutenants, okay? But as one non-commissioned officer said to me, I've served under second lieutenants and boy, do you guys need help, okay? So they really busted our chops. We were up at 0 dark 30 and we'd run miles, and those non-commissioned officers got us in shape. It was really good training. And it was really a reality check about what was to come too. So it was very good. It was the job was well done by the infantry and the non-commissioned officers.
Now, John, in the midst of all this, or at the tail end of this, you're going to get married to St. Helen, aren't you?
Yes, my wife of 57 years as of earlier this month, whose first name is Saint. Okay. We were planning on getting married between infantry officers basic training and my arrival in Germany. Okay, and we were going to honeymoon in Germany. Then one morning at 0 dark 30, I'll never forget it. All those of you who were going to Germany, we're in formation. All those of you who were going to Germany, report over here. So I remember saying, what was the tense of that verb? Okay, so we reported over to some building and there were like 20 of us that were assigned to a special unit being formed for a secret mission. So after infantry officers basic training, I was either given 2 weeks of leave or I could go airborne. I remember I did have the discussion with my wife about, and we knew what the secret mission was, okay, even though we weren't told. Obviously, there was a unit being formed to go to Vietnam, and we weren't going to Germany. So I remember calling my wife and saying, maybe you want to delay a little bit more, but God bless her. She said, no, we're going to do this. And so we went ahead and we got married. And we honeymooned in Bermuda for 4 or 5 days before I had to report back to Fort Benning, where the 199th Light Infantry Brigade was being formed.
So that's just incredible to me from a human interest perspective. And there's a whole other story about how you almost didn't make it to your wedding because you got ill, but folks will have to wait another day to hear that one. So after you get married, it's after the honeymoon that you go to Camp Shelby for advanced training. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Part of the June 1st of 1966, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade was formed. We brought NCOs, non-commissioned officers were brought in from Europe, from around the world. A bunch of privates we were built up to an entire brigade. And we had advanced unit training during, we left November 20th, we left for Vietnam. So it would have been September, October, we had advanced unit training and they sent us to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The bottom line of the advanced unit training is we wanted to go to Vietnam. Okay, it was the most miserable place. It was swamps, it was wet. There were snakes. There's still some critters we came across that are undefined that I cannot tell you what they were. But we practiced tactics in a very wet, warm, moist Vietnam semblance type of environment at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, making us want to get out of there and go to Vietnam. That's the best thing I can tell you about that.
So you're getting ready to go. As a newlywed, how do you settle your personal affairs? Where does Helen go?
Yeah, so what we did is everyone in the unit, we made out a will. I wrote letters to Helen. I wrote letters to my parents. Helen went back, lived with her parents, and she was an office manager at the Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Foundation down in Washington, D.C. Her parents lived in Maryland, so she went back and lived for that entire year with her parents, and went back to being an office manager at the Kennedy Foundation. Yeah, it's really brutal. You know, I don't know what to tell you. It's you know, you literally you wrote love letters to your wife. I remember I said, you know, if I don't make it, you gotta set up a new life, and you gotta go on and remarry and yada yada. My mom and dad, and to I think to my brothers and sisters, I don't remember, but you wrote the letters, you made out your will, and you know, reality set in. And but still, you know, when you're 23, 24 at the time, you're invulnerable. You're going to save the world. You have each other. You relied on each other. You relied on the other guys. In my case, the other officers. I was a battalion liaison officer at the time. So my MBA did help initially until a month in country when we had so many casualties among platoon leaders. I was sent down to be a platoon leader. But yeah, it wasn't, reflecting on it is worse than when you're going through it, because you just got to do what you got to do. Okay.
Yeah. So you actually wind up sailing to Vietnam on a World War II era troop ship, right?
Yeah, I got to tell you, this was the General Daniel I. Sultan, and we took off from Fort Benning at 2 a.m. in the morning. They took buses to Atlanta. We flew to San Francisco, and then we boarded the ship. And I mean, I was lucky. I was an officer, okay, but I can tell you the first meal was lunch. Okay, so I don't know, mid-morning we're aboard, and the ship sails off underneath the Golden Gate Bridge, which is not golden, by the way. Okay, but I do have pictures sailing under it. And you kind of said prayers about, you know, please God, you know, let me see it again, let me bring it back. Okay, the first meal that the Navy the Navy served, the first course. Now, the officers had it great. Okay, we had our own dining room and everything else. Now, as a second lieutenant, I was not up near the generals and the captains and the majors and colonels and all that. But the first course was soup. Okay, so you're on this boat which is rocking right and left, and you're looking down at this bowl of soup, and it's going right and left as well. I never got seasick, okay, but I got to tell you, I never had a really great appetite. But yeah, we took off November 20th. We didn't get in country to December 10th, so that was, you know, over 3 weeks we were on the ship. The most hopeless and helpless I have ever felt was on that ship, because we hit a typhoon, which is like a hurricane at sea. And I remember that ship dipping down off a wave, and the waves, and I would look up when I was out looking out the porthole, and the wave was 45 degrees. The next one was 45 degrees up. And I'll never, it was sort of like, you know, please God, get us on solid land, you know, get us off this. We did have a suicide. Someone jumped overboard. So we did have to, and those, the maritime was you had to circle and for 24 hours. So we had to do that. John Wayne movies were popular. I mean, it wasn't really up to date. The guys who were in the hold were stacked 5 or 6 to a bunk. If you had cots, one on top of another, head, toe, head, toe, head, toe. If someone got sick, then, you know, everyone got sick because you're in such confined quarters. Yeah, we tried to teach maneuvers. You taught weapons. Everyone could take apart an M16 quickly. I can remember the day we approached Vietnam. I went out on deck in the morning, and you could see, I don't know, 15, 20 miles away, you could see land. And all of a sudden here was this wall, this incredible wall of humidity and heat. I don't know how to describe it any other way. It was sort of like you could just push against it. As soon as you got on deck, it was just, hello, welcome to the heat and humidity of Vietnam. And I can remember the last thing about the sailing, because now this was December 1966, early in the war. We were welcome to Vietnam because I think we were the first major unit that had sailed over. We were welcome to Vietnam with a band. There was a band greeting. I remember being on deck and looking out, and there's the brigade commander, the battalion commanders, all the high officers, and young ladies dressed in ao dais were putting leis on their heads. And I remember saying to myself, oh my God, I'm here to either kill or be killed. And there's a band welcoming us. It just struck me as so incongruous that we would be feted, I guess it was, we were being welcomed by the local Vietnamese, that we were here to help them fight for their country. But it struck me as so incongruous. But that was my trip over, yes.
Yeah. Wow. So where were you stationed?
I was stationed in Long Binh, which we landed at Vung Tau, and Long Binh, as I recall, was less than half a day travel by 2.5-ton trucks. The reality set in when we had never been able to load ammunition before. We loaded ammunition. We did not put a round in the chamber, but we got on the 2.5-ton trucks. We went up to Long Binh, which is where we were headquartered. We arrived, December 21st, 22nd. The 9th Infantry Division was coming. It was arriving right after us. We immediately were sent out into perimeter defense around the Long Binh headquarters, which was just a muddy field at the time. It was nothing like what it became. Again, this was December 1966. So we spent Christmas and New Year's, as it turned out, in perimeter defense and foxholes around Long Binh, which is, 5-7 miles northeast of Saigon, as far as I remember. Still on holidays, Christmas and New Year's, I always, when I'm with my family or my daughter or my sons are hosting, I always toast the military and those who are on the wall, especially those in faraway and dangerous places, just because I reflect back on, you didn't feel deprived, but it was just, I remember Silent Night was wafting across. We were a mile out or whatever, and I can remember hearing Silent Night. Someone had it on the radio back at the base camp. And New Year's Eve, I can remember it was a mad minute. Okay, it was everyone fired into the air. That stopped pretty quickly because then Charlie, the bad guys, kind of knew where everyone was. But anyway, that's where we went and what we did initially.
So as you get settled, what's your primary job and mission? And remember, we said to try to use the most basic possible language for anyone who's not familiar with military terminology.
Right. Okay. Initially, I was a battalion liaison officer through December. And then I became a platoon leader in January. So as a battalion liaison officer, I was a gopher for the battalion commander. I go for that, go for this. Okay, so that was really nothing. As a platoon leader, I had 43 men on my squad. Now, for any women who are on board in the combat or listening, in the combat arms, there were no women at the time. It was all men. So I had the table of organization and equipment would have me. I had 4 10-man squads. I had the smartest guy who taught me an awful lot. Sergeant Tolfrey was my first platoon sergeant. I can remember remember, the training he gave you to reduce it to simplicity was lead by example. Don't ask your men to do anything you're not willing to do. And I carried that on in my entire career. I was the first one in the office. I made the coffee in the morning for everyone else. Okay, but you lead by example, and don't make your men do something you're not willing to do. He was the smartest guy. I mean, he was in his mid-30s. He was really kind of ancient. Okay. The bravest was the platoon medic, and we have several platoon medics that are tour guides. Whenever there was a point of danger, the medic had to go there. The second least intelligent, I say, is the radio telephone operator, because not only did he have a 50, 60, 70 pound pack, by the way, they started off, we went out with about a 70-pound pack, and then your second time it was all of a sudden closer to 30 pounds, because you were not going to carry all the stuff that you had. But he had a 10, 15-pound radio on his back with an antenna that stuck straight up in the air saying, hello, I'm here. And then I say the least intelligent was the platoon leader, because he was on the phone calling in artillery, calling in gunships, whatever. I was frankly, I really, instead of having 4 squads, I usually had 3 squads, not only due to casualties, but we rotated about 9% out every month, so that 12 months from our arrival, we wouldn't have the entire unit being replaced. So I was closer to 30 men, 3 squads, a platoon sergeant, platoon medic, and the radio telephone operator. But I turned 24 over there, 23, 24-year-old kid. I thank God I had Sergeant Tolfrey, my platoon sergeant, is what I should say.
Did Sergeant Tolfrey survive the war?
He did. I kept in touch with him for, I don't know, let's call it a decade, for a long time. He was from South Carolina. Then, in the 70s, all of a sudden the letters were returned, and I don't know what happened. There were no computers that you could do a Google search or anything like that. So I don't know what happened. Interestingly, just to follow on this, my last radio telephone operator, Doug is his first name. I won't mention his last name if he doesn't want it. About a year and a half ago, I'm on Facebook, and all of a sudden I get this IM saying, are you the John Nugent who was, Charlie Company, 3rd Platoon, da, 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 da. And we're back in touch.
Wow.
My last radio telephone operator and I are back in touch. Once a quarter, we spend 2 or 3 days going back and forth on the latest with the grandkids, and he's into classic cars and everything. But so that's what I did. That was my table of organization and equipment as a platoon leader.
Sometimes you fear maybe technology is ruining the fabric of society, but that's an excellent use of technology there.
Yeah,
John,
it really is.
to reconnect after all these years. So your platoon would operate in the field for 30 straight days and then return to the rear area for about 3 days of R&R. Can you tell us a bit about those field operations?
Yeah, we had a bunch of key operations. I think the 4 or 5 most important one, night ambushes. We were heavy into night ambushes. We did a lot of river operations. I operated in 3 Corps. I operated from 2 to 7 o'clock around Saigon, mostly wet, some mountainous area, but mostly wet. A lot of river operations. We did search and destroy. Our company was the best company in the battalion, so we had a lot of we led a lot of battalion assaults. If the Big Red One were going to be doing something, or the 9th Infantry, the 25th, they were division levels. They needed someone to go in and clean out the landing areas. So we did a lot of helicopter assaults into that. Of the 30 days we were out, probably 20, 21, we were actively doing something. The other 7, 8, 9, we were resting in the forward area, not in the back area. So it was continuous efforts and continuous search and destroy. Was we were under Westmoreland, was search and destroy. So it and usually during an average, say 7-night period, it was at least 4 nights, if not 5, that we were on night ambush.
So you use that phrase search and destroy. Did you then feel like you clearly understood your mission and how your mission fit into the broader US goals in the region?
Yeah. I understood. I was well equipped. I was well trained. I had ammunition. Our resupply was excellent because we had a helicopter group assigned to the 199th, so we had priority in getting resupply. Medevacs, we had all that. But your question's interesting because the longer I was there, the more I became disillusioned and concerned about winning the war and concerned about the tactics. How were we going to win over the hearts and minds of the people when we never occupied Viet Cong territory? We would move in at night. One of the night operations we used to do was to move in at night, surround a village, and then sweep through the next day, destroying heavy caches of rice, taking all weapons, incarcerating young men. Okay, but it was futile in a way because the bad guys, every village had dogs, and they would hear us coming, and so the dogs would bark, and so no one would talk to us when we swept through the village the next day. If they did, then they were dead the next day or their tongues were cut out, and we saw that happen. We didn't win the hearts and minds of people. I had one operation, and hopefully I'm not going too far on you. I had one operation where instead of a normal 30 to 45 minute exchange with guerrillas, which we had, was the first time we ran across North Vietnamese regulars, and we had over a 2-hour, maybe 3-hour battle. The company commander was wounded. I had to take over the company. We had to call in, it was a Navy pilot who dropped napalm on the bunkers so that we could extricate ourselves. And I remember the battalion commander with whom I was friends because I'd been his liaison officer back, when we were early training. He came out and I said to him, "Where did these guys come from? These North Vietnamese?" And because it was mainly Viet Cong in our territory. And he said, "Well, they probably came down the Ho Chi Minh Trail." And so I remember saying to him, I don't understand, because that wasn't something we knew back in '67. I didn't know. And he said, "Well, it's a supply line that comes through Laos and Cambodia." So I said, "Well, why didn't we go occupy it?" And he said it was off limits. I mean, to this day, I didn't know what to say. We're in a war. I have body bags right over there of guys from this contact. I've got to write letters to their moms, and we had off limits. Okay, so it's something that it really sticks with me and with a lot of veterans, that we never fought a military war. In my judgment, we didn't fight to win. We didn't invade North Vietnam. We didn't cut off or interdict the supply lines. And maybe it was right. Maybe the smart people knew that China or Russia would be coming in. Okay, well, if so, then get us out. Okay, why keep us in if we're not going to fight to win? If we're afraid of what might happen if we do what is smart militarily. You should charge a therapy session here, okay?
No,
but just one final point. McNamara, who was the architect of the war, he wrote a book in the mid-90s, Vietnam, the Tragedy and Lessons Learned. And he said in the book that he knew at the end of 1965, he felt that we did not have the political power or the political will to win. The end of 1965, he sensed that we did not have the political will to win, to do the kinds of things that were necessary. We had over 45,000 more to be killed after he knew that, okay? And it's just so, talking to other Vietnam vets, it's just so frustrating that this happened. But I saw that while I was there, and this was 1967, okay? And the war there were still 6 more years of US troop involvement and, another eight more years of the war to go on. And we knew we weren't going to interdict. Yeah, we bombed it at some point, but you never occupied and stopped the supply lines. So thank you for listening while I said that.
No, that was very well said. There's a quote in one of the textbooks I use in my Vietnam War class, and I forget who says it at the moment, but someone says it's like trying to hit a cork with a sledgehammer, right? And you can hit that cork and it'll go down in the water for a moment, but it's going to pop right back up. Now, I imagine that impacts your morale greatly, right? Are your men coming to this realization at the same time you are? And how is that impacting morale and your ability to function?
Yeah, that's really a great question. You fought for each other. When you're in a situation like that, you learn to control. One of the big learnings of what I try to teach the kids when I give tours, you learn to control the controllables. We could not control the direction of the war. What we could control was being safe, getting the guys. I could control being safe, getting my men back. In fact, my radio telephone operator about 6 months ago in our exchange, he said, John, you kept us safe. I mean, that may have been, that may have been one of the nicest things anyone said to me. So what you did is you tried, you stayed with each other, you protected each other, you controlled what you could control. You couldn't control the direction of the war. I could control the safety of my men being safe. There was only one time there was a mission to, I had to go back into an ambush point where I had a lot of contact. I'd had casualties, and I knew the bad guys would have put booby traps in. And if you will, it was a river that ran down and then split like an upside down wishing bone. And I was supposed to go up in here and ambush, set up my ambush points at night along the 2 rivers. But I'd already done that, and it was bad. And the men, were worried about that. So what I did is I went over here. I went over on the side. I went over here and I set up my ambush point. I accomplished the mission, but to answer the question, you kept your men safe, okay? And we had contact that night, and we did get body count. We did get weapon count. Very interesting. My company commander kind of knew what I had done, but because we had been successful that night, he didn't push it, okay, to his credit. But so yeah, the morale, you couldn't just get depressed, okay? So you picked each other up. You fought for the guy next to you. You wanted to make sure that they came back so that, they made it through another day. And that's the best answer I can give you on that, because you didn't want to think about the futility. You wanted to get home, and you wanted to get through the day in order to get home.
Yeah. So speaking of unit cohesion, how did people from different backgrounds get along? Because I imagine you have people of different races and religions and socioeconomic status. Did that matter?
Not in the infantry, not out in the field. I can tell you that whether black, brown, white, the only color you didn't want to see was red, and that is the sign of blood. Sergeant Tolfree, I mentioned to you, he was African American. He was a brother to me. Okay, and I just never really thought in terms of black or brown or Puerto Rican or Irish or whatever. You just didn't. You were brothers. You formed unique bonds. You wanted to live. You did want to accomplish the mission. You did want to try and save people. But I didn't care what religion, what ethnicity, what color. You fought for each other and you survived. Now, when you were back in the rear area, it became a little different. There was liquor, there were drugs, not heavy in the infantry areas, but I've read stories or talked to others where those kinds of rivalries or racism could rise to the surface when in the rear area when we came back for the 3 days. But our guys stuck together. The infantry guys, the grunts, they really stuck together. It was very unique. Very unique bonds were formed.
What about your interactions with the South Vietnamese troops?
Yeah, the bottom line, that's a good question. The bottom line here is I was married up with Vietnamese platoons on 2, if not 3 occasions, and for like a couple of weeks each time. And it was a South Vietnamese Ranger unit. It was a yellow badge with a black lion head or tiger head, I guess it was, on it. So they're South Vietnamese Rangers. The bottom line is, just like Ukrainian soldiers are today, they were fierce defenders of their homeland. But when we first married up, I don't remember in the first engagement I had where they were. I don't remember seeing them. Whereas at the end, my guys had to pull back because they were closing with the enemy and engaging with the enemy. And the reason was, until the US arrived, the South Vietnamese army only had the food they carried. They only had the ammunition they carried. They didn't have the resupply capabilities until the US military came along and provided that kind of weaponry or that kind of supply. If someone got wounded, they would have to be carried to a road and then, put onto a truck and taken to a hospital until the American came with a helicopter. So once they had the ability for resupply and for medevac, they became fierce fighters, and they were really excellent.
Now, one of the things you wanted to make sure we cover tonight is the Tet Offensive. You said that the Tet Offensive was not a real surprise to you. So can you tell us a bit about your experience during that period?
Okay. Tet, as you know, was January 31st of 68. I came back November 20th, but in October of that year, just before I got out of the field, we had an engagement. And again, it was one of the 2-hour type engagements as opposed to a less than 30-minute guerrilla hit and run. And we captured, and I was with a South Vietnamese unit. We captured 2 North Vietnamese officers. And it was, I believe, a colonel and a major, as I remember it. And the South Vietnamese with whom I was married, they started to interview them. And they were told that in the document, they had some documents to confirm it. They were told, the purpose that these North Vietnamese military top officers were there was to organize the local Viet Cong cells to attack a bunch of cities on a major holiday. So this is October of 67, right? 3 months before Tet. So myopically, I thought, well, yeah, it's going to be Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? Okay, well, the major holiday was the Tet Offensive. We forwarded these officers, we went back to the rear area with the documents. I know, assuming the South Vietnamese with whom I was married at the time had read the documents right and did the interrogation right. We knew many Viet Cong cells attacking many cities on a major holiday. That's what we knew. Okay, and that was 3 months before. I expected when I got back, Thanksgiving, that nothing happened. Christmas, nothing happened. In fact, Westmoreland and Johnson, I remember a joint press conference saying, we are months away from total victory in the war. And I remember saying to my wife, I can't believe, I had this intelligence, I captured these guys a few months ago, and then bam, Tet hits. And as General Giap said, the head military in North Vietnam, as he said, we snatched defeat from the jaws of victory. Over 60% of those who attacked in the South Vietnam were killed or wounded, but the media turned against us. Walter Cronkite was there within 2 months, and we started talking peace with honor, okay? And yet we had, again, we didn't fight a military. We had 60% were killed or wounded, is what I've read subsequently. And Tet, we lost the confidence of the American public. We lost the media, and everyone turned against us. The confusion of the war with the warrior, et cetera, et cetera. So I knew Tet was coming, defined as what I've just laid out in the last minute or so.
You just referenced losing the American public. And of course, Johnson says, if I've lost concrete, I've lost middle America, right? And this is when there's a big surge in protests, and this is when you're coming home, really. Talk to us a little bit about your return home. In your Rutgers oral history interview, you talk about signs at the airport.
Yeah, when the Freedom Bird took off from Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, and the applause when you get out of the South Vietnamese territory was just, it's 50 plus years later, I remember it as over yesterday. We refueled in Guam, landed in California. In those days, you came down the ramp onto the tarmac and into the airport. So we're coming down and going in. And about half a football field away, there's a demonstration, and we had been told there were demonstrations, be ready. Now, this was still 67. Okay, this was early. This was November of 67. But there was this beautiful blonde girl who had a headband, had a long gray dress on, and she had a sign that said "Baby Killer." And I remember looking at it and just stopping and pausing and saying, the ultimate reason I just spent 12 months doing what I did and what all the guys did was to fight for the freedoms that we have here in America. Okay. And those freedoms include the right of speech and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And they're using those freedoms for which I fought against me. Okay. I remember, cognitive dissonance set in. Okay, how can people not wonder why veterans returning from Vietnam were so disillusioned? I'm often asked, why did you Vietnam veterans not join the American Legion and the veterans of foreign wars? Well, we tried to. Okay, but the media and therefore the public confused the war with the warriors. Okay, the unpopular war, and the warriors were part of it. We formed the Vietnam Veterans of America. Our motto is, never again will one generation of veterans abandon another generation of veterans. After the first Gulf War, we showed up at the airports to welcome these veterans back. So yeah, it just wasn't right. Okay, the confusion. None of us wanted to be 12,000 miles away in rice paddies being shot at. Okay, none of us. Okay, but the media fueled I think the demonstrations, and it hurt a lot of us. Now, to be fair, from what I've read subsequently, it was mainly the two coasts, the West Coast and the East Coast, which were the hotbeds of resentment. I went back to Fort Benning, and that's the cradle of the infantry. So that was like being back in the womb. Okay. And then I went back to Procter and Gamble, and I had a couple of awards. They wrote them up. They had a big event for all of the veterans coming back to Procter and Gamble. The Midwest was more patriotic than the East Coast and West Coast at the time. I won't comment on it now, but so they welcomed us back. Okay, there. So, but that first one was just striking that, you know, that the warrior could be confused with the war. It just was striking. Thank God that hasn't happened, even though we had another, you know, mess in the Middle East where we had all this war for so long. We didn't learn a lot from Vietnam as far as specific objective and strategies, exit strategies, but we welcomed the veterans home. You should have another therapy session here.
No, this is wonderful. I do want to just kind of work through your post-Vietnam life briefly so we can get to questions, because I think that's such an important piece of Vet Chat is when the audience gets to ask questions. So you come home, you eventually find your way back to Procter & Gamble. Just give us a thumbnail overview of your post-war life.
I went back into consumer packaged goods marketing, which is with Procter and Gamble, and God was really good. It's a very competitive, it's a high risk, high reward kind of career pattern. I made brand manager. I was the youngest brand manager in the foods division of Procter and Gamble. You always had people trying to hire you away. My management positions were with Unilever. If part of my success there was the introduction of I can't believe it's not butter, margarine, which is a whole nother story, which we can talk about some other time. But it was Unilever was really great. Johnson Johnson, I was president of one of the companies. And the things that, you know, I learned the discipline of hard work from my dad, from my parents. From Vietnam, I learned to control the controllables. I never got too high, never got too low. I appreciated everything I had. I never accepted a bad situation that I couldn't work myself out of when it came to a career situation, whatever. And the final thing I did was a leverage buyout, the founder of a leverage buyout in the private equity world, which was really the most fun of my career, was I could create my own environment, my own culture. So it was luck, it was God, my wife praying all the time for me, and some of the disciplines that I learned in Nam and from home and from my high school, Regis High School.
Now, John, you come home and you have this incredibly successful career and you raise a beautiful family, but as a 23, 24-year-old young man, you had been asked to do really unimaginable things. You were put in these situations. Were you able to put that behind you, or did you find it haunted you? And did you have any particular coping mechanisms that you used as you are building this very successful post-war life?
Yeah, I guess God gave me the ability to shut things out. That's what I never talked about it until 9/11. I never joined. I joined the American Legion. I joined the Veterans of Foreign Wars. I joined the Vietnam Veterans of America because I was so angry on 9/11. I just shut doors, okay? What I find really interesting now is, since I've been at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial since 2009, is bonding with other veterans. The same rapport, the same dependency, the same feelings, the same brotherhood that I had back in Nam 50 years ago, we have at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. There are about 20 tour guides. There's no rank, there's no social status, there's no financial status, there's, you know, I'm not going to say we love each other, okay, but I mean we're there for each other. It's an amazing rapport, which helps get through things, because during my career I never took time to think about things. I couldn't control what happened there, just shut it out. But now you can talk with these guys, and it really, it's just a bonding, and it's a unique relationship, like it was 50 years ago in Vietnam with my platoon, okay, and now it's with a bunch of old guys, okay.
Well,
but that helps. That helps.
Speaking of those old guys, your words, not mine. I know many of them are here on the call this evening, along with some members of the general public. So let me stop with my questions and open it to the floor. As I said, just a reminder, we are recording. You may unmute yourself and ask a question if you would like, or you can go ahead and type it in the chat and I will read it for you. So who would like to have the first question or comment?
Do you mind if I go, Melissa?
Please go ahead, see.
John, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and experiences. It was really, really interesting to hear your opinions on a lot of it. I have a two-parter question. Actually, it's two separate questions. One of them is, you had mentioned that, Catholic school was a really good prep for the military. I've also been to Catholic school for 9 years, so I can totally relate. But in spite of that, what do you think was the biggest thing you were not prepared for in Vietnam, besides, that tangible wall of humidity and heat that you had mentioned?
Okay, well, first of all, T, let me thank you for your organization, which is thanking Vietnam veterans down in Barnegat, and thank you for being on the board of trustees, because you're a very welcome addition to the board of trustees. So thank you. Hey, I'll tell you what I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't prepared for for losing people. I know people died in war, but I can remember it hurt so much to know people. When I would assign people, when we had a maneuver and we were the lead platoon, and I would have to pick the squad to lead the platoon, and they would pick the point men. I knew who the point men were, and the toughest thing was to separate. It got so that I didn't want to get to know the new men. Okay, I just didn't want to be hurt if you lost someone. So I wasn't prepared for the pain of friendship being lost and death impacting me. I wasn't prepared for that.
I wasn't prepared for that answer. I thought you were going to say something, more superficial. So that means a lot that you did say what you did. And I had a different question, but now I think I'm going to just go off of what you just said. Did that then affect the rest of your relationships for the rest of your life? If you don't want to lose people and you're kind of not getting to know them well, then do you think that tainted the rest of your relationships for the rest of your life?
Well, now, if you want to talk to my wife, this could be a difficult conversation. No, because I knew I'm smart enough to know that that's an issue. Okay, and I'm not afraid to I've never been afraid of letting people get close to me. Okay, so no, but it's because I'm consciously aware of what that did to me, that I make sure it doesn't happen going forward.
Gotcha. And then one last one then, because that was just a very, very quick answer. You didn't ever talk to your dad about your military career or anything like that. But if you were to talk about it with him, what kind of advice do you think he would have given you about how to deal with what you came back to after the war and the protesters and the current events going on at the time?
Yeah, good question. I'm glad you're on the board. These are really tough, good questions you have. Okay, my dad, it's interesting. I'll be quick here. My dad was director of the Veterans Administration office in New York City and then in Newark. Okay, that was his civilian job as he was in the reserves. And so he would have said to me, you know, I've said to other veterans and what other veterans say to me, you know, you did a good job. Don't look to others for approval. Okay. And so I learned that kind of early on also. I don't look to others for approval. I know if I did a good job or a bad job throughout my entire career and in relationship to, so I think that's what he would have said to me is, you did a good job. Don't rely on others for your, your self satisfaction or for your self approval. You did a great job. You defended your country. You accomplished your mission. And be proud of that and disregard what they're saying. So I think that's what he would have said.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for your
you, T.
questions, T. Okay, anyone else? You can unmute yourself for a question or comment, or go ahead and type it in the chat. I see Bill unmuted. Bill, did you want to have a question or a comment?
Yes, I did. Great presentation, Melissa and John. Thank you. Every time I hear your story and a story, but your life and military, it's amazing, and just so much congratulations for everything you've done. But my question is the caliber or type of soldier that you encountered, because I came in 66, Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I of course one of the few that did a career, you might call me a lifer, some of you, but anyway, I stayed in for 21 years. But I've always said that to me, in addition to all the other situations we encountered, we almost lost our United States Army in the early 70s because of Vietnam. And what I mean by that is that I look at the type of soldiers that you had, and you can look at whether it's the hairstyles, lack of peace symbols on them, less drugs, let's say, especially with the infantry like you described and so forth, to what that became as we went into the 70s, 71, towards the very end of 73. And then those soldiers were back in the States or back in Germany. And, there were race issues and many other things going on. I had a little bit of break going to get my bachelor's degree, but I was in the Army in that, still obviously in that early 70 period. And it was a different breed of soldier than what I encountered in the early days. So I'm wondering, I have the opinion that the soldiers you served with and unfortunately some of them died, with you and so forth, they were just an excellent caliber and breed and demographic group. Is that essentially correct, John?
Yeah, a good question, Bill. Thank you for your service too, by the way. I was really proud of the guys of my platoon. They were from all over the United States. I had heavily Black and Puerto Rican representation, quality individuals, and protective of each other, protective of me, and as I was protective of them. There's only one I remember, a guy got a Dear John letter, and all of a sudden, after a night of ambushes, we saw him wandering in a field, and apparently he was trying to get shot, okay, because he'd gotten a Dear John letter. So there was only one situation out of, I don't know, I probably had 60, 70 that rotated through that would be a guy who wasn't fit, okay? Otherwise, I mean, people would volunteer to carry the machine gun. People would volunteer to carry the radio, okay? So these heavy duty things, I was very proud of them. And so I've also read about subsequent issues with the Army and the standards that exist today, for example. And I won't comment on that because I could go on for too long, but my guys were great. I only had one instance I can remember where there was someone who was not mentally equipped or not mentally there. They were really good guys, and we fought for each other.
Thank you for your question, Bill. Next question, you can unmute or type it in the chat. Ron, are you waving your hand there? You're on mute. Ron, you're
There we
on.
go. That's
There
that.
you
Yep,
go.
there we go. I'm just trying to get back. Hey, here we are. Welcome back to Jersey, John.
Hey,
It's
Ron, good to see you. How's the engineer?
Hanging in there. You did a really good job tonight, and I appreciate it. And also welcome home and thank you for your service. One of the questions I had for you, John, and we never really talked about is, did you ever eat any of the food that the Vietnamese had? Did you ever eat any of their cuisine?
That's a great, and Ron, thank you for your service, and welcome home to you as well.
Thank you.
The engineers are great. I want you to know that. Okay.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. I'll tell you one quick story. This was right after we had gotten over there, right after we'd married up with a South Vietnamese platoon. And it was okay, Ron, I think you have to mute.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
I got it.
Melissa,
Okay, so here I am. Okay, my entire company, they had press release. Westmoreland came out, and we were meeting. We're matched up with the families of the South Vietnamese platoon. The platoon leader was sitting to my right, and he'd made like a submarine, like a hoagie, made a sandwich. Okay, and he cut it in half, and he took half, and he gave me half. I bit into something, it had to be a pepper or something. All of a sudden, my lip swells up. I start violent hiccuping. And the PR people, because Westmoreland's about to come by, get me up and rush me out so that, there won't be a scene because photographers were there. I ended up in the hospital for 2 days with some kind of food poisoning. My wife got the letter from the second day in the hospital instead of after she got the second day letter before the first day. The second day letter said something like, I can get used to this air conditioning and these clean sheets, and this is really good. And she goes ballistic and goes to the Red Cross to find out, why am I in the hospital? And then she gets the first letter the next day saying, I had food poisoning. So yeah, I've had water buffalo steak in addition. Boy, is that tough. Okay, so water buffalo steak in that one instance. Otherwise, I stayed off of local food.
That was a great question, Ron. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
We're going to have to change your experience with Vietnamese food, John. I'll make sure of that.
Okay,
I'll make sure it's a good experience, but not for my
I'm
not for my
ready.
cooking. Not for my cooking would be a very bad experience, but
I have one last question I'd like to ask John, if there's none from the audience, but I prioritize the audience. Jim McGinnis, did you unmute to ask a question? Nope, he went back on mute. Okay, I want to make sure I'm not a question hog here.
Is that good?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
The story you told me about meeting the NVA officers in the in the Ho Chi Minh Trail area. No one took that seriously, but the Tet Offensive was so experienced, such a special experience that we should have learned from, right?
Yeah, thank you for your service, Jim, and welcome home. Yeah, it's strange. I don't know how to explain why we weren't ready for Tet. The implication is they didn't believe the information that we had captured. Tet, it was the greatest military victory we had, and yet we never followed it up. I can't explain how Tet happened based on what I know and what I relayed to you earlier. I'd love to. I've never read anything about it, about why we weren't prepared, why we didn't anticipate it. They should have known. They should have known. So I can't explain it, Jim.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question. Okay, any other audience questions?
Yeah, I have another one, Melissa. I'm sorry
ahead,
to jump in. Jim, I'm more on a personal note as well. So as you said, you finally had your honeymoon, I think you said in Bermuda back in '66. Now, did you get, hopefully you got your R&R. Did you meet your lovely wife in Hawaii about halfway through your tour?
Yes, sir, I did. That was, I waited 7 months, in fact, so I only had 5 months left. And we met in Hawaii. It was 7 days, 6 nights. Interestingly, and I haven't thought about this in 100 years, I think the most depressed I've ever been in my entire life was when I was flying back from Hawaii to Nam, because I knew what I was going back to, and I knew what I had left, and I still had 5 months to go. But yeah, that was a highlight of my entire life, was that Hawaii. And we've been back there subsequently on business trips, and I brought the family there once, I believe, only once. And it just, all the memories flood back. And you know, there can be man's inhumanity to man, but there are a lot of good things God's given us too.
That was a great question. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions from the audience? All right. Well, I have dropped the link in the chat to a 7-hour interview that John did with the Rutgers Oral History Archive. If anyone is interested in reading more about his story, it was absolutely fascinating. I could not put it down. And as I'm reading it, I'm saying, this was a long interview. And John said, yeah, I think it was close to 7 hours, right? So John has many moving and informative stories to tell if anyone wants to take a look at that. Before I make some final closing announcements, though, John, I want to make sure you have the last word. So please share any final thoughts that you have before we bring this to a close.
Let me just quickly run down what the key lessons learned that I and other tour guides tried to give to the kids. And these are some of the important life lessons learned, as well as from Vietnam. Number one, the importance of public service, the importance of giving back to society, the importance of getting out of our own little bubbles and trying to do some good for the rest of the world. And I say to the kids, the high school kids we give tours to, Peace Corps, Teach for America, Church Mission, the military. It's a way of giving back to society. Number two, the importance of patriotism. If you haven't traveled outside of our country, you can't really appreciate what we have here in the United States. This is one incredible country. People try to get in, people don't try to get out. And it's okay to be patriotic and to wave the American flag and to get teary-eyed at parades and to stand up when the flag comes by. Number three, respect for the military, respect for veterans, respect for first responders. These people are willing to give their lives for us. Let's respect them and say thank you to them when we see them. If I see a cop, I say thank you for your service. If I see someone, I'm near Seagirt National Guard, someone in the military uniform eating at a restaurant, I'll buy him the dinner or buy him a drink, whatever. Number four is the media. Make sure both sides of a story. There are left-wing opinion news organizations and right-wing opinion news organizations. Go to both of them. Don't just accept one or the other. The next to last, all of us veterans fought ultimately for the freedoms that we have here, and those freedoms can only really be guaranteed or guided by the politicians that we have elected on the national level, and the state level, and the local level. I make all those kids that I give tour guides to swear that when they turn 18, they'll register to vote, and that it will be an informed vote. It won't just be pulling an R level or a D level. It'll be, an informed vote. And the last thing I always try to preach, it's the best thing I learned in Vietnam, I think, is to control the controllables. I could not control the fact that I was there because my country sent me there, but I could control what I did there. I could accomplish my mission and keep my men safe while doing that. So controlling the controllables, I think, is a good life lesson. And let me just conclude, Melissa, by saying to you, thank you for being on the board. Thank you for being the glue that holds the board together. We tour guides really love you and what you do for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. Well, everybody, we've come to just about 9 o'clock. I want to thank our president and CEO, Amy Osborne, and our staff and our board for allowing me to volunteer and help out with Vet Chat as needed. I, of course, want to thank all of our veteran tour guides for all they do. I am in awe of your service and in the way you give back to the community now. So truly, thank you for all you do. Thanks to our audience for joining us tonight, and especially thank you for John, so movingly sharing your memories with us. It's not something you have to do, you choose to do it, and it truly is an incredible one-of-a-kind opportunity for people to hear about the past in the words of those who lived it and to use that information to make the world we all live in today a better place. So thank you, John. Please, everybody, stay in touch with the New Jersey Vietnam Veterans Memorial Foundation on our social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And our website is njvvmf.org. For those of you that are local, I urge you to visit our memorial and museum in Holmdel. It is always a moving visit, and there are always new things to see. So there's always a good time for a return trip. As far as events go, we have many coming up. Of course, you want to save the third Thursday of every month for our Vet Chat. And in June, we will be featuring Mr. Ron Wentworth, so you won't want to miss that. We have our always very moving Memorial Day ceremony coming up at the memorial on 11 a.m. that day. We've got our annual clay shoot on June 12th. Again, you can find all of the information you need on our website, njvvmf.org. So thanks, John. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.